Okay, so I have the great job at 10:30 p.m. to introduce you to Theology of St. Thomas. I have to say I have never done that at that time of night. Yes. Yes, usually the high school girls that I had the pleasure of teaching for the last 6 years, I at least was working in the morning, so they were awake. So hopefully you are awake as well. I'm going to start with a quote from Pope Leo XIII because it sort of gives a reason for why St. Thomas. So here's what Pope Leo XIII said. This point is vital, that bishops expend every effort to see that young men destined to be the hope of the Church should be imbued with the holy and heavenly doctrine of the angelic doctor. In those places where young men have devoted themselves to the patronage and doctrine of St. Thomas, true wisdom will flourish, drawn as it is from solid principles and explained by reason in an orderly fashion. Okay, so this is coming from one of our popes. And there is a lot in the writings of St. Thomas that I think is perfect for our current age, which is seeing sort of a very sharp division between faith and reason. And St. Thomas is a master of bringing the two together. So when you read the St. Thomas, there are three basic things that you will see, three basic principles that you will see in pretty much anything that he wrote. And the first one is that he has a very holistic approach to whatever he is writing. He sees all science, so everything that can be discovered by reason, as one big system. So there's nothing in St. Thomas as we experience in the modern time of those very small compartments of knowledge. I studied mathematics for a long time, and there was this teeny tiny piece of mathematics that I know very well on a very advanced level. But at the same time, I almost feel like there's a lot that I don't know. When you read St. Thomas, you can see that he knows a lot about everything. Because his view of knowledge is that at the very center of knowledge is theology. She is the queen of the sciences, and she binds together your physics, your chemistry, your biology, your economics, everything else. So as you study theology, you get an insight to all of the other sciences. Right? Theology is the queen of the sciences. And Sister Imelda Ann did mention it, that kind of approach to knowledge requires a humility towards truth. So that means you take the truth where you can find it. Right? It doesn't matter where it comes from. You examine it, and if it's true, you embrace it. Right? So holistic approach to knowledge. The second one is the sort of a marriage between faith and reason. We need both. This is actually very much connected to who we are as men and women, human nature. Right? We are intelligent creatures. We are creatures. We rely on God, and this is where faith comes in. There are some things that we cannot know, and we need faith. Right? But there are other things that we can know by reason alone, and we should. Right? We should study. So faith and reason go together. And we have those two phrases that you can see in St. Thomas. First is faith seeks understanding, and we all heard that. Right? As I come to believe in things, there's this desire in me to understand what I believe, right? So faith seeks understanding, but also understanding is guided by faith. And actually, I looked up Wikipedia on St. Thomas, and I was amused actually because when I got there's actually quite a good exposition of St. Thomas. I didn't read it to a very detail. But one thing that struck me was that there's a very small portion in it that deals with opposition to St. Thomas. And it actually, what it says, and I don't remember whom is it quoting, but what it says is that in St. Thomas's use of reason, the reason is not totally free, because it's guided by faith. And I'm like, yes, it's supposed to be, right? That's the whole point, right? Our reason cannot know everything. We are not God, right? Our reason is much less powerful than that even of angels. There are things we can know with certitude, but there's a lot of things that beyond the tool of knowledge that God bestowed on us, and therefore we need faith, right? So there's this double interaction going on between faith. Faith seeks understanding, but reason, understanding, is guided by faith. And you see that at every step of St. Thomas. During the Council of Trent, as the bishops were, gathered together to discuss the problem of the Protestant Reformation, there were three things lying on the altar as the bishops were discussing, seeking God's will for the church in their time. And those three things were the Book of Scriptures, which makes sense, right? Because sola scriptura. That's what we are arguing there. There were papal decrees, right? The magisterium of the church, the tradition of the church represented in those. And there was the Summa of St. Thomas, representing the reason that the fathers were hoping to employ to protect the church. So I found that, go St. Thomas, represented right there in the Council of Trent. And there's a story that I think gives a very good sort of witness to St. Thomas's balance between faith and reason. And at the time of St. Thomas's life, when he was a master of theology at Paris, the Dominican order got in trouble for teaching Aristotle. Right? And there was a trial at Rome to which St. Thomas was sent to defend the order of preachers, the Dominicans. And he got there, and he had only 24 hours to prepare for the defense. And he got this big stack of manuscripts to study of the accusations. And the 24 hours he spent in the following fashion. He spent the first 12 hours praying, not even looking at the manuscripts, and the remaining 12 hours reading and studying and preparing the best defense that he could. So that's St. Thomas. That's the balance of faith and reason, right? Prayer and study together. And the third, so we have holistic approach, faith and reason, and the third principle of St. Thomas that you can see in almost all of his writings is the systematic approach. So when you read St. Thomas, especially one of his bigger works, you will see that it's self-contained and building step by step on itself. So it's actually a good idea to read St. Thomas from the beginning to the end. You don't have to, but it will make much more sense if you do, because he is very thought through. His presentation of the theology is very well thought through. So it's very systematic. So I will just spend a few minutes really talking about the Summa Theologia. It's not the only work of St. Thomas. There are many more, and there are works of St. Thomas that are in philosophy and all kinds of theology, dogmatic, spiritual theology. Sister mentioned some poetry and prayers. So I don't want you to think that that's the only thing that St. Thomas did. But it is, as Sister said, an introduction to theology. So if you're seeking to study theology, that is a good book to pick up and really study it. It's not an easy read. It's not your meditation. It's not your spiritual reading. But it's worth to study because it will give you the understanding of your faith. And it's actually kind of curious because it is a work of St. Thomas that was written at the very end of his life. He never finished it. His secretaries, his brothers finished the Summa. And he wrote it under obedience. And I always wonder, what was it like for this famous professor of theology at University of Paris to be told by his Master General that he is to write Theology 101 book, introduction to the theology that every brother in the order could understand. So it's like, writing a book on addition. I don't know, it's very simple, but he did it, and those fruits of his obedience benefit us till this day. So it just shows how great of a teacher, great friar he was because of his obedience, but also a great teacher that he could take the truths of theology and put it in a book, right? It's a pretty big book. So Summa has, I'm going to do a diagram here Summa has 3 parts, but the middle part has 2 parts. Okay, how many of you have seen the Summa, like read the Summa? Oh, good. All right, that's great. That's great. So you will need this if you want to pick up Summa. It will make more sense. So there are 3 parts in the Summa. And what the Summa presents is the systematic approach to all of the theology that you could ever want to study or start with. So in the first part, St. Thomas talks about God and creation. Right? Because that's the reality. That's what we are dealing with. So you will find in this first part of the Summa, that God is one, that God is truth, and that God is Trinity, and everything you would like to know about God is right there. And then St. Thomas goes to creation. He talks about visible and invisible creation. So he's going to talk about angels. And his treatise on angels is actually so excellent that's why St. Thomas is called the angelic doctor. Right? It's because of that part of the Summa. So here you have both angels and men. Right, and all the other visible creation as well. Right? So he sort of paints a picture of reality of what's out there, right, in the first part. So if you want to read about how does angels know, how do the angels know versus how do the men know reality, it's right there in the first part of the Summa. Then the second part has 2 parts. So there's the first part of the second part and the second part of the second part, and that's always confusing. When you see 1-2, that's the first part of the second part. And then we have 2-2. It's the second part of the second part. And you'll see people who are Thomists, they will just talk about that like that was their daily bread, because it probably is. In the question 17 of first part of the second part, and some of them actually right away know what it's about. It's really quite amazing. I would love to get there at some point. So in the first part of the second part, St. Thomas talks about happiness, action, human action, passions, habits, vices, sin, law, and grace. So if you think about that, St. Thomas is talking about how do we try to approach God, right? God is our end, and we have many natural capacity to get to God, right? But he also talks about how God comes to us in law and grace, right? So there's a connection. St. Thomas paints a connection between God and creation. So that's the first part of the second part. The second part of the second part is all about virtues. So the virtues get their whole book. And what's really neat about that if you, for example, want to read up more about gluttony, you have to go to the second part of the second part, find a question on temperance, and in that question on temperance, you'll have gluttony. Right? So all of the virtues are in that second part of the second part, because virtues are important, right? This is the holiness in action. This is how we become. This is our part, what we have to do to become saints. Right? Second part of the second part of the Summa. And the third part, this is taking it to a wholly supernatural level. The third part of the Summa is all about incarnation and sacraments, right? And the incarnation is God coming to us. And sacraments, well, it's really us going back to God in a very supernatural way, right? So this is sort of, I like this diagram because it's your diagram of all theology at once, right? You have your dogmatic theology in there, you have your sacramental theology in there, you have your spiritual theology in there, moral theology in there, everything is in there, right? So that's the basic outline of the Summa. So part 1, God and creation. First part of the second part, happiness, action, passions, habits, vices, sin, law, and grace. The second part of the second part is all about virtues. And then the third part, incarnation and sacraments. Right? So now, why, if there is such a great book out there, why isn't it published all over the place and you haven't read it yet. Well, it's a scholastic treatise. There is a part to the St. Thomas's Summa that makes it hard to read for us, for people living in the modern time, because it's written in a scholastic treatise, which means it's written in the system of questions and answers, right? So every part of the Summa has big questions, and then under each question you have article, which is a detailed question. And then every article has several objections, which are usually kind of fun to read, because they tell you what the people were, how the people were arguing against the given question. Right? And then St. Thomas comes in and he gives two answers to the question. The first answer is always from authority, and that's where he calls mostly Scripture the fathers of the church. And it's usually a two-sentence answer. So if you ever want to just know the answer to the question, you find a question and you go to the first answer from the authority, and you read it, and it's 2 lines, tops 3, and you get your answer. That's the answer from faith, right? Because we don't need an explanation, you just receive it. Right? And then what follows is usually several paragraphs that start with, I answer that, and that's the answer from reason. And that's where St. Thomas goes and employs philosophy and everything else that he knows, science, to answer the question and give the best possible reason for the answer that he gives. And then the very end of each article is the reply to the objections. Right? So that's the scholastic treatise. And one of the principles that you will see when you read St. Thomas, you almost get to a point, he's one of those teachers who, when you ask him a question, his answer is always, well, it depends. It's always, it depends. So it's never yes, no. There's never a question that the answer is yes this way or no. We always laugh that in St. Thomas there's a principle of never deny, seldom affirm, always distinguish. So it depends. The answer is always depends. But those distinctions is exactly what increases your understanding of the faith. So here's another quote from another pope. This is more modern, more current to us. This is from Pope Pius XII. And here's another quote about St. Thomas. For those who apply themselves to teaching and study of theology and philosophy should consider it their capital duty, having set aside the findings of a fruitless philosophy, to follow St. Thomas Aquinas and to cherish him as their master and leader. So what I would like to finish, I would like to give you 3 recommendations to approaching Summa. The first one, if you're brave enough and you want to look at the real thing, you can get a free copy of it, download it, or at least look at it from www.newadvent.org. I think it's org. And this is a nice website. It has the fathers of the church, the scriptures, but it has the complete Summa Theologia. So if you want to see the full version of it. There is, which I like, not everyone likes this version, but there is Summa Theologica, a concise translation. I cannot spell concise translation. And that one is edited by Timothy McDermott. And if I remember correctly, he is an Irish Dominican. I think he's Irish Dominican. He's Dominican, either English or Irish, but I think he's Irish. Is it right? Yeah. And this is a complete Summa, but it's written in a modern way. So without question answers, just paragraphs after paragraphs. But it is pretty dense. It's nice theology. So if you have background in philosophy, it might be something to try. But there is also a very neat little book which is called My Way of Life. My Way of Life. Which is called, also has a subtitle of Pocket Edition of St. Thomas. And this one is written by Walter Farrell. Who is also Dominican. And this one is really neat. I always had my students in high school actually read it, because it is simplified, it is poetic, but it follows the same outline. So if you're afraid of philosophy and theology, but you still want the big picture of what the approach to philosophy and theology is of St. Thomas, that might be a great place to start. I didn't see any, I couldn't find it free on the internet, but you can get it from Amazon. So that's it.